Grateful to have you, Doc. We'll come into the post-election matters, especially when it comes to the economy. But let's start from financial literacy. Over some time, we've seen, people preaching the gospel, if I should say, of financial literacy. But I want to pick your thought on the role policy and regulation has to play when it comes to financial literacy in our space.
The first and foremost responsibility for investor education or public financial education falls on the regulators. The regulators here, I'm talking about Bank of Ghana, I'm talking about National Pension Regulatory Authority, Securities and Exchange Commission, and NIC. These are the four principal regulators that we have in the country, and to a large extent, Ministry of Finance.
Talking about that, now let's move straight to post-election matters and also the economy once again. I want to pick your thoughts. Now we have President-elect John Mahama in. We've seen inflation still within the 20s, also policy rates still within the 20s. I'll come to that. Now, I want to pick your thought first on the new government we'll be having probably from January 7th. Your thought first on that when it comes to the economic space.
Yeah, if you want to measure the responsibility on the new government, you want to look at the margin of win. The margin of win gives you an indication of the responsibility that the new government have and the expectations that Ghanaians have by way of what we think they have to do to make life bearable for the average Ghanaian.
He comes in with some social contracts. Scrapping the e-levy, scrapping the COVID tax, the betting tax, and all of that. And there have been some questions, especially from the New Patriotic Party, saying if you have to scrap all these taxes, how do you sort of get revenue going for it to, sustain policies like the free SHS and all of that? From your perspective in finance and all of that, if some of these taxes are being scrapped, what, in the first place, I want to pick your thought on, is that the right to go, or better still, there are other alternatives?
It's a slippery area to look at, because personally, I don't think any government will just go around imposing tax just for tax purpose, most especially when there's an election. So if the outgoing government kept on with those taxes, then it means that there was some need to have that revenue coming in. Now, the issue of maintaining it or not, and from the social contract that you mentioned, the President Mahama-led administration is not new to governance in Ghana. And I want to strongly believe that they didn't just say that to win an election, but they knew the implication of coming out with those proclamations or those commitments to the public. Now, if you are talking about replacing e-levy as we speak now is raking in about 2 billion annually to government. I don't know how much betting tax is bringing in, but definitely it is bringing in something. Once you say you are going to replace it, then the next question, like you rightly asked, is how are we going to replace this revenue loss? Definitely, the NDC-led administration, I'm believing, has a particular, development system in place, or what I call development trajectory in place that, from their point of view, can work without these taxes. If not, then they are going to have some challenges, because if these tax handles or levy handles were bringing in some revenues and you take them off, you are going to create a vacuum. How will you fill the vacuum? Then it presupposes that it has been thought through and they know exactly what they have to do to keep the system running and even have more revenue to undertake many of the social interventions that they have promised the people of Ghana. Now, maybe COVID levy is justified if you want to take COVID levy off. Betting tax, personally, if you ask me, I would say it should stay, looking at the impact of gaming on the youth and on the society, and the fact that gaming per se does not by itself carry a lot of value chain activities with it. Then it presupposes that it has been thought through and they know exactly what they have to do to keep the system running and even have more revenue to undertake many of the social interventions that they have promised the people of Ghana. Now, maybe COVID levy is justified if you want to take COVID levy off. Betting tax, personally, if you ask me, I would say it should stay, looking at the impact of gaming on the youth and on the society, and the fact that gaming per se does not by itself carry a lot of value chain activities with it.
No, sorry to cut you, but talking about betting tax, well, there may be conversation that had to do with employment. If you are to cut this, how do you expect these young people to also get something? Some claim that is how they seem to survive. What about that?
You know, it is difficult to live your life on gaming. Gaming is once in a while. You may win. It takes a long time before you win. So the question is, how do you sustain your life on this stream of unpredictable income? The difficulty is this. You realize many individuals who are into gaming have a poor understanding of risk. So they are prepared to put something of value into an event whose outcome is uncertain. Now, if the outcome is very uncertain, then likely the return will also be very high. But then the probability of win is very low. How do you build an economy on the back of betting? That is what we need to do. People will be happy to have jobs than to be living on betting. So if you see a lot of your youth go into betting, then indirectly it is saying that there's something wrong with the structure of the economy. So for them, what they can do now is to put their monies into that unpredictable event, be it a football game, a boxing game, just to make ends meet. And that is a dangerous road to go. Why? Because these individuals who are posting or putting their money to betting are talent who can go into ICT, they can go into teaching, they can go into engineering, they can deploy their talent in agri and the area of medicine. Why are they now channeling this energy into betting? Clearly, they don't have spaces in areas where their talent can be deployed. Hence, they are using the betting as a shortcut. We have to relook and rethink that whole policy again. Then look at how best we can give them sustainable jobs so that betting does not become the go-to place when it comes to making ends meet. So clearly, the increasing number is a trend and a worrying trend that I believe that the policymakers will have to deal with. Seriously, betting is not the way to go. The risk involved is too high. We should rather go into value-creating activities that will enhance the life and the living standard of the ordinary Ghanaian. And so, personally, I will have kept betting tax. But then this government have won, and they have decided to scrap it so they can give some relief to the consumers of betting. So we need to just watch the space and see how successful it will be. COVID levy, fine, COVID levy can go because we don't have COVID. So you can make a claim that, okay, since we don't have COVID, we have to let it go. But the question is, what are you replacing it with? And one thing our politicians is that when they take off these so-called nuisance taxes, in the next 2-3 years, you see these same nuisance taxes coming back in other forms. The NPP government did it in 2017, 2018. They scrapped so many of the so-called nuisance taxes. For 3 years down the line, we are back with another set of nuisance taxes. So we need to really think through it. It is an election promise. 120 days is counting after swearing in. Let's see how it will go. But it will be difficult for the NDC government not to go by its social contract. So we'll look at it and we see how we can progress after 120 days.
Talking about this social contracts, it's also been tied to the revenue and expenditure going into 2025. And also, we're also looking at a situation where we find ourselves in the 17th IMF program. From your point of view, how do you see expenditure and revenue going into the next year? And also, especially we being into the IMF program, we've had government say they'll be renegotiating with the IMF. How do you think this renegotiation should be done going forward?
That's the right thing to do because the current IMF program, the extended credit facility, was based on some models and then some, assumptions and opinions. Of course, being influenced by the outgoing government policies. Now, the NDC government has its own policy, and these policies that they have will also be premised on some principles and then some assumptions. It is very well that these assumptions will not hold the same way as we currently have the IMF program. So the right thing is to approach IMF, have a discussion, and then see how the extended credit facility can be remodeled or redesigned to accommodate the NDC's program. So it's indeed right. When it comes to revenue, of course, the IMF policy is how best we can enhance revenue. So the NDC government will have to demonstrate that their policies have what it takes to increase revenue. We shouldn't also forget that the IMF policies are almost always looking at how best to protect the interests of the poor. So social interventions will also have to be accommodated within the policies or within the new program that the new government will send to IMF for consideration. When it comes to expenditure, if you have looked at the IMF programs, in many instances, they are more into expenditure rationalization. How best you can reduce your expenditure so you can have some space by way of savings, so they can save more. They will also look at it, and they will look at how best the new government can have a lean government size and more of a less expensive government expenditure, so that we can work within the framework and sustain the positive gains that we've had from the current IMF program.
Now, look, let's come to the CD. In the last quarter of this year, we've seen some improvement when it comes to our local currency against the American greenback, which is the dollar. Do you expect this being sustained going forward?
That's a very difficult one to answer. The behavior, let's say, for a month now, the CD has been quite, interesting to watch, because yes, the fundamentals are improving, but the fundamentals haven't improved that much. Inflation has even increased, right? The MPC rate has been maintained. So then the question is, where cometh the strength of the CD? If you look at what is happening. But of course, international reserves, etc., are also showing some positive returns. So it may be the case that is the channel that is influencing the CD regaining some lost grounds against the US dollar. So clearly, it is the case that the CD has seen some good runs against the dollar. How sustainable it will be going into the year is what we need to look at. But one thing about the trend of the CD is that every 2 years before a major election, the CD has its own behavior. The trend exists. You can pull the data from Bank of Ghana and then try to look at the structural breaks by way of years that we've had the elections. Go back 2 years before that and look at the CD's behavior. After elections, the CD depreciates, but it's relatively stable. So yes, the CD will depreciate, but we are expecting that it will be something that will be within a manageable range. As to whether Bank of Ghana will be able to continually support like they've done in the last 4 or 5 weeks, is something that we all will have to watch the space and see whether it is sustainable from the view of Bank of Ghana. Don't forget that in many instances where there's a change in government, we have had the governors also being changed. New government, new governor. How will the monetary side and the fiscal side work? Let's wait and see after the swearing in what will be happening, and then we can have more discussion on the CD's behavior.
Talking about CD, now let's move straight to inflation. Somewhere last 2 years we went all the way to some 52%, and now it's somewhere around 22%. It keeps going up and down. Within the inflation, food inflation component in itself seems to be driving more when it comes to the rate. How do we tackle this? Because we know food is an everyday thing. You can't do away with food. And how do we tackle this going forward?
Yeah, food is about agric, and it's about the value chain within the agric sector, and how much control you have. When I say how much control, how much ownership stake you have within the agric value chain. We hardly do processing. hardly do we take over the whole processing value chain within the agri sector. What we do is there's a primary raw one that we consume. So clearly, if you want to deal with food inflation, what we need to do is to move away from smallholder farmer practices to go more into commercial farming. There is this mystery that many of us have not observed. If you look at the advanced countries that have food security, if you look at the population of the countries with food security that is employed in the agri sector, very small. They have food security. If you come to countries that are classified as not being food secure, food insecurity, interestingly enough, these countries have higher percentage of the population being in agri. What is it telling us? There is a disconnect between the type of farming practices we have, which makes it look as if we are employing a lot of people within the farming agri sector, but not producing enough to feed us, compared to other countries where they have a smaller population in agri, but then they have more than enough food to even export to us. We need to change our agricultural practices. We need to look at going to big-scale commercial farming. And this is what will happen. Because our government, year in, year out, have been lazy in creating jobs. What they have deceived us with job and employment is that a lot of individuals have been employed within the smallholder agri sector, thinking that they are doing a lot of work within the agri sector by way of employment. But in actual fact, the output is rather an underutilization of their expertise and talent. What we can rather do is that we should pump more money into commercial farming so that we can release these hands. The question we need to ask ourselves is, why is it that the developed countries have, in terms of problems, they have fewer problems and lower unemployment rate? And then the developing countries like us have many problems and high unemployment rate. What it means is that we are refusing the talent that we have here to solve the problem. They have lower unemployment rate because they have been able to tap into the talent that they have. Every single unemployment person you have on the street is an existing problem that we are refusing to solve.
Though we seem to have some challenge when it comes to inflation, policy rate and all of that, it seems the economy is growing. Third quarter, we had some 7.2 coming from the second quarter of 6.9. That means we are heading somewhere. First, how do we sustain this, especially looking at the fact that we have the mining, quarrying, or even the service sector leading, but I mean the industry sector has been largely driving this growth. How do we sustain this in the first place? And also, within the employment space, employment perspective, how do we sort of have more of these guys or the mining sector employ more of these more young people to keep that particular area or the economy going?
Yeah, when it comes to the GDP, I think that was the third quarter GDP. Yeah, end of this month, we are going to have a full picture of the whole year. And I think there will be some normalization in terms of each of the quarters, right? So first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. How will it all figure out when the year comes to an end? Then we can have a good picture on GDP and the growth. Of course, 7.2? Yes, that is very impressive. And if you are, a watcher of the economy, you have interest in the economy, you should be excited that there's some level of rebound in terms of growth in the economy. Like we rightly said, the sectoral contributions is what we need to look at, and how the sectoral contributions can drive the major concern of unemployment. Now, it depends on the sectoral contributions and its quest to make use of technology. If the sectoral contributions that we are seeing right on technology, where technology then demands the employment of less hands, then it's going to be extremely difficult for these industries that are technology heavy to drive the economy, the unemployment rate that we want to reduce. Now, if we can also look at these same sectors and then look at the value chain, you see, the longer the value chain, and then the more involved you are in the value chain, the more you benefit in the value creation activities. If it is a mining sector, and the mining sector, we do mining, right? We don't process. We don't do anything about it. And then we just export it. Then you will have the gentlemen who go underground to go and mine. You have the companies that will employ few hands here and there, and then that is it. The chain is so short that they are not able to tap into the value creation, benefit of it. So we need to again go back to look at this industry and then the value chain that exists there. And it is heavily dependent on technology. And technology, in many instances, cuts down on the number of hands that you need. They are going to see this growth happening, but this growth will not translate into the needed jobs that we have. And once we don't create a job, we are not able to carry a lot of the youth who are prepared to work along. And that creates problems. So you have growth without jobs. But you need to have growth that creates jobs for your indigenes. So I believe that the new government will need to look at the space again and then to see how best the value chain activities in there can be improved, and then more so have a lot of indigenous players within the value chain activities so that at least they can also employ a lot more of the youth so that we can benefit from the growth figures that we are seeing. It will grow. It will keep growing because you are under an extended credit facility. And in many instances, when we have the IMF supervising us or, partnering us in our economic management activities, we tend to see a lot of positive results than when we are left on our own, because in many instances we are not disciplined within that particular, situation when we are left on our own. So let's expect that as the new government go to renegotiate, they will negotiate well, and they will have areas like you just mentioned, GDP, and then the channel of the GDP growth being looked at again, so we can create some jobs for the average Ghanaian to have some job to do.
Still talking about the subsector, the sectorial, having that conversation within that space. There are also conversations, especially with the extractive sector, the mining and all of that, that you're being taxed, and you have some experts say, okay, there's a need for them to be taxed to create jobs. Do you foresee that as the best option, or better still, as you rightly made mention of the fact that they need to incentivize? Should we go within the taxation from where we should use that money or funds or proceeds be where we get from there to create jobs, or better still, we just look at the fact that, okay, this particular space as creating jobs, so why don't we keep pushing them?
One thing about the mining sector or the extractive sector is that it is very sensitive to tax changes or tax increases. You'll be shocked that a 1% increase, just one, can cause so much havoc to a mining company.
Non-performing loans has been one of the biggest problems when it comes to our financial sector. We've had banks suffering as a result of that. Also, savings and loans companies. I remember recently in one of their annual general meetings, they made mention of the fact that teachers, nurses, basically public workers, do abscond to other parts of the world with these monies being borrowed from some of these savings and loans companies. How do we sort of get our head around this? What's the way forward?
So long as you provide credit in any form, as a bank, or even if you are selling normal tangible goods and services and it's on credit, you will have the problem with non-performance in terms of loans or credit. So once the economy is moving more from cash-based transactions to a credit-supported economy, we'll be confronted with non-performing loans. But the issue then is the high level of non-performing loans. That clearly shows that we are having challenges and difficulties in loan management from the banks. And that will start from when the loan request is made by the client. The process that the client will go through, the before loan process, right? Then the after loan process. What do we do? And how best do we manage the entire process so that it will be successful in the sense that the loan will perform, meaning that the borrower will end up paying for the facility. So we need to look at the entire chain, not just after the loan, but even before the loan is given. What are we doing within that space? And what measures do we have, not only the bank, but what measures do we have as a country to deal with before loan and after loan extension process so that we can deal with the non-performing loans? One thing that we can rely on is the national identity. You see, the national identity is one particular unique identifier that if we are successful as taking a stronghold on it, it will help us to know who is who. And if you're able to link all our other economic activities around the national ID, then we have solved a big problem when it comes to the area of non-performing loans. In that case, you cannot take loan from one institution and then disguise yourself and go and take another loan from another institution. There will always be a trail on you because your unique identity is who you are. This leads us into the discussion of the credit scoring. Once we start building up this culture of credit scoring, right from the universities or let's say the tertiary institutions, young adult level, and then you have your credit score, you have a score, it will be your responsibility to maintain a good score. Because the higher your score, the lower the rate at which you are going to borrow. So everybody will have a unique identity that mimics his or her behavior. Every business will also have a unique identity, which is a credit score that is going to mimic his or her behavior as a borrower. So in that case, if you go for a facility and then you mismanage the facility, it will affect your score. It will affect your next loan rate. If you're an individual and you go for a facility and then you mismanage the facility, it will also affect your score. So your credit, the credit scoring system now will help us to model many of us in the formal sector and even the informal sector to be financially disciplined. What we have to do is to speed up the process of finalizing the credit score, maybe linking it up to the Ghana national identity, Ghana card identity, so that it becomes a unique identifier, and then I can be known and my history can be tracked. Even if I have to buy electricity, right, I need to use my ID, and how I buy my electricity should also give me a score on the credit scoring system. Water bill, how promptly I pay my water should also be calibrated into my credit score. Other things that I buy, if I'm buying furniture on credit, should also be calibrated onto the credit score. If we're able to do this, the entire system will be built on credit. And that credit system will be so robust that if an individual goes to a facility and is not able to pay, he can easily be tracked. And then we can deal with such bad borrowers, because the existence of the bad borrowers is what is hurting the good borrower. Because the banks sometimes find it difficult to differentiate between a good and a bad borrower, the banks end up charging a standard rate. And the standard rate becomes so expensive for the good borrowers, but less expensive for the bad borrowers. And that is what is resulting in these high NPLs that we are seeing. So we need to manage the entire loan process. What I mean is before the loan is given, when the loan is given, and then after the loan. And the objective is that the borrower must come again for another loan.
But should that be the role of the regulator or the banks or financial, institutions themselves?
It's a responsibility for all. It's a responsibility for the regulator, the banks, the individuals, or let's say financial service consumers. We all have a responsibility. You understand? So we can't leave it on the doorstep of the regulator. We can't leave it on the doorstep of the financial institutions. All of us have a responsibility. From the central government point of view, we can use the Ghana card as a starting point. And let's quickly build the credit score around the Ghana card. And let's have that unique identifier when it comes to lending. Let's pull the data together so that before I even go for a credit facility, I'll be directed to go for a credit score. And I'm going to use that credit score as one of my, let's say, my documents to request for the loan. The banks understand what the score means, and I also understand what it means for me, so that when I service or I don't service the loan, it will then affect my next score that I'll have. And that will bring in some level of discipline. If we can start, we can even go back to the mobile money account and use our behavior on the mobile money account when we go for these mobile money loans as a starting point to start building the score. Especially for those who have not borrowed formally, we can use the mobile money conduit as a starting point to build their credit score. At the universities, those who have not come for loan before, we can also target them. If they have gone for student loan, it's also another area that we can use to manage or to start building the credit score. The point is that you must build the credit score over time.